For the world, I was Eleanor Bennett, the woman who had everything. Magazine owners called me the Queen of Hospitality, the British entrepreneur who turned a small luxury hotel into a global empire. At gala events, I was the wife of Henry Lockwood, the brilliant investor with a flawless smile and a gaze that seemed to dominate everything around him. To anyone looking from the outside, we were the perfect couple, powerful and admired. But what no one saw were the cracks hidden beneath the impeccable surface. When I met Henry, he was everything anyone could want: intelligent, ambitious, and absurdly charming. I felt safe by his side. He made me laugh, listened to me attentively, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I could relax. He used to say he admired my strength, my independence, but little by little that speech began to change. At first, there were the harmless questions. How was your meeting? Who was there? Then the questions became more specific. Why did you get home so late? Do you always travel this much? Over time, these questions stopped being mere curiosity and turned into an interrogation disguised as concern. The worst part was that I justified everything. I convinced myself that he just wanted to protect me, that it was normal for a husband to care about his wife. But it didn't take long for me to realize that while he smiled at the world outside, at home, his gaze was always calculated. That's when I started noticing small details. My phone was never exactly where I had left it. Passwords, I was sure I hadn't changed, suddenly didn't work. Calls that ended the moment I answered them. Deep down, I knew something was wrong, but I always found an excuse not to dwell on it. Then came the trip. During a dinner in our penthouse in London, Henry suggested we go to the African savannah. He said he needed to disconnect from business, breathe fresh air, and that we both deserved some time away from the hustle and bustle. The way he said it made me hesitate. Looking back, I realized the mistake wasn't just accepting. The mistake was ignoring the chill that ran down my spine when I saw his smile that night. At the time, I tried to convince myself that it was paranoia. After all, what kind of wife would refuse a trip to one of the world's most exclusive destinations? On the day of departure, he was light, almost excited. When the plane landed, a private car was already waiting for us, ready to take us to the luxurious resort in the heart of the savannah. During the ride, he held my hand and looked into my eyes. "You have no idea how happy I am that we're here, Ellie." I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe it was just a romantic getaway. But something inside me knew that in that golden, breathtaking landscape, I was about to be betrayed in the worst way possible. The first days in the savannah felt like a dream. The resort was stunning, a luxurious retreat set in the middle of the vast wilderness. Elegant chalets surrounded by dense vegetation, balconies that opened to an infinite horizon of reddish earth, and acacias twisted by the wind. During the day, we took guided tours, watching lazy lions in the shade, herds of elephants moving with an almost hypnotic tranquility. At night, we dined under the starry sky, with the silence broken only by the distant roar of some predator. If I didn't know Henry so well, I could have been fooled. He made an effort to appear affectionate, attentive, as if he were truly enjoying our trip. He touched my hand during dinners, smiled as he listened to my stories, watched me with that charming look that had won me over at the beginning of our relationship. But something was off, a restlessness I couldn't define, something about the way his eyes studied me for too long, as if he were waiting for something. Then came the small slips. One morning, I woke up and found him standing on our chalet's balcony, speaking on the phone in a low, urgent tone. When I approached, he immediately hung up, shoving the phone into his pocket with a rehearsed smile. It was just the office, nothing important. Another time, during dinner, I noticed him, glancing at his watch repeatedly. He seemed impatient, as if counting the minutes for something only he knew. I asked if something was wrong, but he just laughed and changed the subject. That night, I woke up to a metallic noise. Henry wasn't in bed. I got up, still groggy, and found him kneeling in front of my open suitcase. My heart pounded. "Henry?" He turned quickly, his eyes glistening under the faint moonlight streaming through the window. For a moment, he looked like a stranger. "I I was looking for your charger. My phone died. My eyes drifted to his own suitcase, just a few steps away, completely closed. He could have taken his. He could have woken me up. But he chose to rummage through my things in the middle of the night. Something was very wrong. The next morning, as we had breakfast on the resort's main deck, Henry touched my wrist lightly and said something was very wrong. The next morning, as we had breakfast on the resort's main deck, Henry touched my wrist lightly and said he had a surprise. A special place he had discovered and wanted to show me. It's a secret lookout point. No one but the guides knows about it. The sunset there is spectacular. My throat tightened. Something inside me rebelled against the idea, as if my own instinct were trying to warn me. Can't we go with a guide? He laughed, pretending to find my hesitation amusing. Ellie, you trust me, don't you? He already had the answer before I could even respond. As we got into the Jeep, the warm Savannah wind brushed against my face and an uneasy feeling crawled through my chest. The car moved along increasingly narrow trails, pulling away from the resort and its safety. Twisted trees surrounded us, the sun beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. Henry was driving unhurriedly, a subtle smile on, his lips as if savoring the moment. We're almost there, he said, his fingers tapping lightly on the steering wheel. The trail ended at an elevated point, a cliff that dropped abruptly into a rocky gorge. The view was, in fact, spectacular. An endless sea of Savannah stretched to the horizon, golden under the twilight. Henry got out of the car and walked toward the edge. Come here, love. Look at this. A chill ran down my spine. He never called me love. At least, not in that voice. I took a few hesitant steps. The edge was closer now, the wind blowing hard, pushing my hair back. My heart pounded like a drum. Henry turned to me slowly. The smile was still there, but his eyes were something else. Coldness. Determination. Did you know they say some birds can glide for miles without flapping their wings? He took a step toward me. But others, poor things, drop like a stone. Panic exploded inside me. Henry, what are you doing? He laughed, a sound that made the air around me feel thinner. Flap your wings, little bird, or you won't survive. And then he pushed me. The world shattered around me. The wind sliced my face as my body plummeted through the void, the cliff receding as if time had slowed. The scream stuck in my throat. The impact didn't come immediately. First, there was only despair. The air burned in my lungs, the feeling of being suspended in nothingness, the absolute certainty that I was going to die. Then came the first hit. My body ricocheted off the cliffside, slamming into jagged rocks and twisted branches. Pain exploded, ripping through my skin, my hip crashing against something so hard it made me see stars. The impact spun me in the air, and for a second, I thought I would keep falling, straight to certain death. But something caught me. Roots. Thick, gnarled, jutting from the earth like claws. My hands, driven by pure survival instinct, grabbed onto them. The pain in my fingers was unbearable, but letting go was not an option. My arms trembled, my legs dangled in the air. My chest heaved in desperation, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. Below me, the gorge stretched out like a hungry mouth. If I let go, there would be no second chance. The wind whipped against my face, blowing dust into my eyes. My nails dug into the rough bark of the roots, but I knew I couldn't stay there for long. Every muscle in my body screamed in exhaustion. My arms burned, the wounds on my legs throbbed, and warm blood trickled down my face. I turned my head upward, searching for a foothold. A little higher up, a rocky ledge looked big enough to support my weight. I just had to climb. With every inch I moved, the pain intensified. My ribs ached as if they were broken. My body slipped. My hands burned with the effort of holding my own weight. But the only alternative was to fall, and I wouldn't give Henry that gift. With one final push, I threw my body onto the rock. My nails scraped against the rough surface, my chest slammed onto the stone. The taste of blood spread in my mouth as I bit my lip hard. But I had made it. I lay on my back, trying. to catch my breath. The sky above me was an endless blanket of stars, shining indifferent to what had just happened. Every breath was a blade slicing through my ribs. The memory of Henry's face burned in my mind. The smile, the coldness, that satisfied look. He had planned this. He brought me here with one goal: to kill me. A sob caught in my throat, but I didn't cry. I couldn't. Not yet. Time passed, but I couldn't tell how much. My body shivered from the cold and pain. The darkness became my only companion, and the solitude of that vastness was crushing. If I died there, no one would find my body. Henry would return to the resort, give a heartfelt speech about my tragic fall, and no one would ever know the truth. Hatred kept me awake. Then I heard voices. Faint at first, a whisper against the wind. My eyes widened. Fear froze me in place. Animals? Henry's men coming back to finish the job? The dim light of torches flickered between the trees. The figures appeared soon after. 3 men, dressed in light robes, moving cautiously along the trail. They seemed to belong to this land, their steps silent on the dry earth. I tried to move, but a shock of pain shot through me, making me let out a faint groan. It was enough. The 3 men stopped abruptly. One of them pointed in my direction. My heart pounded. Then one of them stepped closer. I lowered my gaze to my own body. I was covered in blood and dust, my arms scratched, my clothes in tatters. I looked like a corpse that had somehow survived. The man's eyes narrowed as he studied me. Then he turned to the others and said something I didn't understand. My lips parted, my voice failing. "Help!" That was all I managed to say before the darkness swallowed me whole. I woke up feeling as if my body were made of stone. Every muscle ached, and the slightest movement sent pain pulsing through me like an open wound. The smell of herbs and damp earth filled the air. My eyes opened slowly, blinking against the dim light filtering through the thatched roof. I was no longer on the cliffside. The rustic ceiling, the clay walls, the woven mats on the floor. This was a hut. I lay on a thin mattress, covered by a coarse but warm fabric. The memory of the previous night hit me like a punch. Henry, the fall, the searing pain, his cold stare before pushing me to my death. Rage surged inside me. I tried to move, but a groan escaped my lips before I could stop it. The fabric curtain serving as a door shifted, and a man stepped inside. He was one of the 3 who had found me by the cliff. His face was lined with time, dark skin contrasting with sharp, watchful eyes. He carried a wooden bowl and placed it beside me. "You are lucky," he said in English, his accent thick. "Many wouldn't survive a fall like that." My throat was dry. I tried to speak, but my voice came out hoarse. "How long?" 4 days. My breath caught. 4 days. Henry had probably already returned to the resort. Maybe he had even told his version of the story. Maybe he was crying, saying it was an accident, that I had slipped, that he had tried to save me. The man watched me patiently. "My name is Kofi. My village found you. We took care of your wounds." My head ached, the information tangled together, but only one thing mattered. "I need to get out of here." He showed no surprise, only tilted his head slightly. "Where to?" I opened my mouth, but I had no answer. I couldn't just go back to the resort and appear alive in front of Henry. He would finish what he started. "I need a phone." Kofi studied me for a moment before standing up. "Rest. We will talk later." I didn't want to rest. I wanted to act, but my body didn't obey. The pain was too heavy an anchor for me to get up. I spent 2 more days in the village, absorbing every detail of that simple but welcoming place. The villagers treated me with kindness, but they knew I didn't belong to that world. I was an outsider, a foreigner who had fallen from the sky like a bad omen. On the morning of the 3rd day, Kofi brought me a phone. "Speak quickly." "Bad. Signal." My hands trembled as I dialed the number. The call took a long time to connect. A click, a relieved sigh on the other end of the line. "Ellie?" The sound of Oliver's voice, my longtime lawyer and friend, made me swallow the lump in my throat. "I'm alive." Silence, then a deep breath. "My God, Everyone thinks you're dead. The confirmation of what I already suspected. Henry had told his story. He had killed me and returned to London as the grieving widower. But what he didn't know was that his life was about to collapse. He tried to kill me, Oliver. He pushed me off a cliff. The shock was evident in his sharp intake of breath. That son of a... He stopped himself. What do you want me to do? I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the pain burning in my ribs. The hatred inside me was like a slow fire, fueling every beat of my heart. Freeze all my accounts. Now. Oliver didn't hesitate. Consider it done. Henry was about to learn that his biggest mistake wasn't trying to kill me. It was not making sure I was actually dead. The silence after the call was deafening. Adrenaline still coursed through my body, keeping me steady, but deep down I knew I was on the verge of collapse. My body was still weak, my skin marked with bruises, my muscles aching with every movement. But none of that mattered now. Henry thought he was in control. He believed that by getting rid of me, he would have a clear path to take everything I had built. He thought he was safe, that he could already move on, wearing his mask of the devastated widower. He had no idea what was coming for him. In the village, Kofi watched me in silence, as if he already knew what I was about to do. I had never told him the details, but maybe I didn't need to. My eyes must have held something different now. I was no longer the woman who had arrived there, wounded and helpless. I was someone shaped by pain and betrayal, someone with nothing left to lose. That night, I tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't let me. All I could picture was Henry sitting in my house, drinking my expensive wine, sleeping in the bed that was once ours, living without a shred of guilt. But his peace wouldn't last long. The next morning, Oliver called back. His voice was colder than usual. He tried to access the accounts. First, the joint account, then the offshore one, then the real estate funds. I blocked everything before he could transfer a cent. A bitter smile spread across my lips. Does he know something is wrong yet? If he hasn't figured it out already, he's about to. Anxiety pulsed inside me. Henry wasn't stupid. The moment he noticed the money was inaccessible, he would start to suspect. He would try to reach out to banks, lawyers, anyone who could help him understand what was happening. And then he would see. His name wasn't on my assets. He wasn't the sole heir. And more than that, the evidence I had been collecting over the years, manipulated contracts, suspicious transactions, frauds hidden beneath layers of paperwork, were now being analyzed. Henry Lockwood wouldn't just lose my money. He would lose everything. At noon, Oliver called again. This time, there was a hint of satisfaction in his voice. He lost it. I closed my eyes, picturing the scene. Henry standing in his office, his face contorted with rage, gripping his phone tightly as he shouted at the bank manager. He had always loved control. The mere fact that he couldn't touch my money anymore must have been tearing his ego apart. He's calling everyone, his lawyer, the banks, even some of our investors. He's desperate, completely. The irony was almost comical. He had planned everything to destroy me. Now, he was the one drowning, but that wasn't enough. Send. Him an anonymous message. My voice came out cold, calculated. What kind of message? I smiled, tasting the first hints of revenge spreading across my tongue. Just say, it's not over yet. The silence on the other end of the line lasted a few seconds before Oliver let out a short chuckle. Consider it done. I hung up the phone and looked at my hands. They were trembling slightly, not from fear, not from doubt, but from anticipation. The first piece had fallen. The game had just begun. The message was sent. I imagined Henry reading those 3 simple words, feeling the blood freeze in his veins. He wasn't a man who liked uncertainty. He had always been in control of everything and everyone around him, but now, for the first time, he was stumbling in the dark. The next few days were a silent game. I waited, watched, tracked his movements, through Oliver, who monitored his failed attempts to recover the money. Henry was panicking. He made frantic calls to lawyers, tried to pull political strings, called emergency meetings with investors. But no one wanted to be associated with a man whose transactions were frozen and who had investigations looming over his head. The walls were closing in. The night before our meeting, Oliver sent me a photo. Henry looked different. The elegant and confident man I once knew now seemed worn out, with deep circles under his eyes and a vacant stare. His clothes no longer had that impeccable fit, and his posture showed a weariness that wasn't just physical. I was destroying him. But it still wasn't enough. I arranged to meet him at the one place he would never expect to see me, a private club in London, where he used to take investors to seal deals with empty promises and expensive wine. I chose a private lounge, away from curious eyes. He would have nowhere to run. When the door opened, the air in the room seemed to shift. Henry froze in the entrance, his eyes widening, his face pale as if he had just seen a ghost. And to him, that's exactly what I was. I smiled. "Did you think you had won, Henry?" He closed the door behind him but didn't move. His breathing was heavy, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. For endless seconds, he just stared at me. "How?" His voice came out weaker than he wanted. I slowly crossed my legs, keeping my gaze locked on him. "How what? How am I alive? How did I take everything from you before you could steal from me? Or how you were so stupid to think I would just disappear?" I saw the hatred grow in his eyes. Henry had always been a calculated man, but now all of his composure seemed to have evaporated. "You ruined everything." His voice trembled with rage. "I had everything under control." "You thought you did." I leaned slightly forward. "But you made a mistake, Henry. The same mistake all men like you make. You underestimated the wrong woman." He took a deep breath, his shoulders rising and falling with restrained fury. "You think you've won?" His tone shifted, calmer, more venomous. "I can still recover. You think money is everything? I can rebuild. I can come back from this." I smiled, but this time there was no amusement, only certainty. "You can try, but you won't have time." The door behind him opened before he could react. Two men entered, their steps firm, their expressions neutral. Henry turned, and in that instant, everything about him changed. His face grew even paler. "Henry Lockwood," a firm voice echoed in the room. "You are under arrest for financial fraud, embezzlement, and attempted murder." He tried to say something, maybe deny it, maybe lie. But for the first time, there was no escape. The cuffs snapped around his wrists. He turned to me, his eyes filled with hatred and desperation. "It was you." The confirmation was pointless. He already knew the answer. I tilted my head slightly, holding his gaze like a sharpened blade. "Now you know who put you behind bars." He struggled, tried to shout something, but the officers dragged him away, and I stood there, motionless, watching. Henry had always thought he was the hunter, but now he finally understood. From the moment he pushed me off that cliff, the game had changed, and he never stood a chance. The news spread fast. Henry Lockwood, the brilliant British investor, the man who charmed the financial market with his strategic vision and charisma, was now just another criminal awaiting trial. The headlines said it all. Henry Lockwood arrested for fraud and attempted murder. Widow reappears and exposes husband's murder plot. The fall of a magnate. He tried everything to escape, hired top lawyers, claimed it was a mistake, that it was all a big misunderstanding. But the documents Oliver helped me gather told a different story. Corruption, money laundering, shell companies. Henry hadn't just been trying to steal from me. He had been enriching himself illegally for years, hiding his crimes under layers of contracts and the right connections. The problem was, when those people realized he had nothing left to offer, they abandoned him. I went to court on the day of his hearing, not because I needed to be there, but because I wanted him to see me. He was seated at the defendant's bench, handcuffed, wearing a suit that no longer seemed to belong to him. He didn't look the same anymore. The gaze that had once been full of arrogance was now weighed down by exhaustion, by hatred, and most of all, by fear. When our eyes met, he was the first to look away. The man who had tried to kill me no longer existed. In the end, Henry was sentenced to a long prison term. The judges showed no mercy. His fraud and crimes were not minor, and with the testimonies we had gathered, there was no way out. His final words were a choked-out scream in the courtroom. "You destroyed my life." But the truth was, he had done that to himself. The scandal was enough to permanently stain the Lockwood name. The investors who once supported him denied any involvement with him. His companies were dismantled, his assets seized. He had become exactly what he had always feared, a man without power. Oliver and I toasted on the night of the verdict. The champagne swirled in the glass, golden and effervescent. "It's over," he said. But for me, this wasn't just an ending, it was a new beginning. In the following months, I returned to London and rebuilt my life. My businesses had survived the chaos, but not without scars. I had to deal with questions, doubts, speculation about how I had come back from the dead. People loved a scandal, and my story was better than any fiction. The difference was, now I was in control. The Lockwood name no longer haunted me. Henry's face no longer appeared in the news. Over time, his story faded into irrelevance. He became just another forgotten name in criminal records, locked away, paying for his own mistakes. I, on the other hand, was reborn. The experience changed me. I learned never to ignore my instincts again, never to justify the small warning signs. I discovered a strength within me that I never knew existed. And most of all, I realized that the best revenge wasn't destroying Henry. It was moving forward, stronger than ever.